Oh, wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, I appreciate you guys making the time to be here. All right, as always. And, just want to go ahead and real quick before we even start anything. Just want to remind you that we have already gone over. Today, we're going to be talking about Beethoven and what he really looked like. Right, his physical appearance as described in primary sources, and by most people that knew him. Also want to remind you, we've done, so many already in the last couple of years of Black Europeans. Just recently, 1 month ago, Karl Marx. You see, did you miss that one? Yeah, the Mancini sisters over here. Yeah, Americans discovering Europe. Look at that. From Indians to colored people. Black European royals whitewashed. Yeah, you see, 2 months ago. We got Brutus, the progenitor of the Britons, son of Dardanus of the tribe of Judah. We got Queen Anne, beautiful black queen. Primary source account 3 months ago. Did you miss that one? We got Abe Lincoln's adding to more sources on Abraham Lincoln, right? His complexion, what he looked like. We got Ekahau, the black captain of the Maya, king of the blacks. Look at all the stuff we've gone over. All right, as you guys can see. Right, we got a lot of Black European research we've done already. French Protestant refugees, English colonists, Moorish Sephardic Jews, the Huguenot videos, individual, Juan Pardo, Black Conquistador, De Soto's expedition, and then this one right here is the one I wanted you to remember. Down here we got the first people of Wales, but over here it says the first Europeans had dark skin. Scientists and genetics prove it. Is this one right here, guys. So if you haven't watched this one, make sure to watch it. Diversity in Mesolithic Europe. The first Europeans had dark. This is about from 5 months ago. Okay. So what I was just showing you is my videos, not even my live videos, just the regular upload videos. And there's so many there. But today what we're gonna be reading is that, Beethoven was so-called black. That doesn't mean he was African. The very first Europeans were so-called black. So that's just conjecture, just because somebody is black, to say that they are from Africa or Negroid. We have already debunked the out of Africa theories, all right? This is the first thing I wanted to say before we even started today, Again, the first Europeans were black. Scientists have proven it. Genetics have proven it. We've gone over, check out the video, all right? So we're not gonna try to debate this anymore. We're just adding icing to the cake, This is just another one. We got another one. I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna prove it to you. Watch to the end of the video. Beethoven was a so-called black man. All right. Now, when we actually Google Beethoven, right, or whatever search engine you use, I'm using DuckDuckGo search. Same thing. You get whitewashed images. You get pictures, crazy pictures like this. This guy is like so pale, has no color. And then you got, how could you mistake these drawings, right? You guys are gonna see how this person is described as dark brown, ruddy, swarthy, black, like a Moor. Does this look like a Moor to you? There's so many different images of him. This one don't even look like the other ones, right? He has a lot of crazy drawings of him. Mostly this one, right? This seems to be the more popular one. Looking extra pale. Extra pale. They all look kind of different, right? But how would you confuse, if this is what he looked like, why would all his descriptions say something else? I'm going to show you all the historical debate around this. We're going to read a lot of literature regarding this, and again, primary sources describing him. Look at this. I mean, damn. Would anybody mistake him for a Moor, or just call him swarthy or dark brown or black? No, right? So what's going on? Once again, invasion of the body snatchers. We got a whitewash history. Look at the evil Beethoven. Whitewash history. Let's go ahead and start reading, guys. We're going to begin with this book right here. It says Beethoven in America. Beethoven in America by Michael Broyles. Okay, just real quick, we got a lot of books to read and a lot of different descriptions of him, but I want to read the literature behind this debate and what people have said before so you guys can get all the context, all right? In the introduction of this book, towards the middle of the page, it says the notion that Beethoven was black gained currency in the 1960s as a number of so-called African Americans promoting black pride, black power, and black separatism, all right, crayon colors. Remember, we know that's hijacked now, right, guys? Argued that Beethoven had African ancestors. So when they say an African ancestor, they just mean he's so-called black or Negroid, right? Which consequently made him an important symbol within such movements. This assertion raises issues regarding historical evidence about Beethoven's ethnicity and the nature of Afrocentrist assertions about Western culture. All right, Afrocentrists messing it up. They adding hijack to a truth. He was a so-called black man, but he wasn't from Africa. There's no proof of that part. Beethoven's role as a cultural signifier raises questions as to how and why black nationalists and separatists specifically singled out a German musician who resides at the heart of the classical canon to advance arguments designed to disassociate themselves from European culture. Huh. All right, we're going to go back to the other book. Don't worry, guys. Just want to go ahead and keep going through different materials. It says here from the Black Music Research Journal, Volume 10, Number 1, from spring 1990. This article is called Beethoven as a Black Composer by Dominique René de Lerma. It says perhaps it was late in the 1960s when Charlie Brown's diminutive pianist, on hearing equivocally that Beethoven was black, listen, exclaimed, I've been playing soul music all my life and I didn't know it. Hey, I forgot about that. That Charlie Brown episode. You guys remember that? When they literally threw it in there in the Charlie Brown cartoon that Beethoven was black. He said, I've been playing soul music all my life and I didn't know it. The question of Beethoven's so-called African or, Negroid ancestry, black ancestry, he was a person of color, has been raised at various times. If the story reached the comic strips, where did it begin? I do not recall when I first heard the story, but I knew that Beethoven's forebears were Flemish and that the region had become Spanish when Joan the Mad married the Habsburg Philip I. Guys, based on our research on Flemish and the whole history there, we know a lot of, black European history there, and also Sephardic Jews going there as well. So, now, they say, the so-called Spanish, right? So during the 16th century, Spain carried its Inquisition into the area where neither the Protestant nor Catholic inhabitants really wanted to benefit from Spain's church-state union. But perhaps an ancestor of Beethoven's was Spanish. That would open the door for so-called African or black background, so-called black. But even the original Europeans already, guys, remember. All right, don't forget about that. A little more ahead, it has been thought that the story of Beethoven's alleged black ancestry began with J.A. Rogers in 1944, but Berwick Sayers in 1915 and 69. It says reports an interview with Coleridge Taylor conducted by Raymond Blathwaite, not further identified, unfortunately, no later than 1907, in which the matter was brought up. Berwick Sayers was asked by the composer to review the transcribed interview. In it, he returned to the theory that Beethoven had colored blood in his veins. The supposition, he thought, was supported by the great composer's type of features and many little points in his character, as well as by his friendship for Bridgetower, the mulatto violinist. All right, so as we keep learning today, we're going to see that not only him, but many of the people around him, different composers, also are all so-called black, including Bridgetower, this famous composer. All right, the mulatto violinist. That was one of his friends. He actually had a lot of so-called Swarty friends in the music industry or in the music community in that time. And he could not avoid a sarcasm. I think that if the greatest of all musicians were alive today, he would find it somewhat difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to obtain hotel accommodation in certain American cities. Wow, because he's so-called black. It really must be said that Beethoven's friendship with Bridgetower cannot be considered as evidence. We have no reason to think, for example, that Barthelemy, Atwood, or Giornovici were colored because they had accepted Bridgetower as their student. But we are all well aware that Beethoven was dark complexioned. All right? Beethoven was dark complexioned and had features that were noted by his contemporaries. Okay? All right, so again, before we continue, just want to go ahead and show one of the sources first. As we continue reading, I just want you to guys see that this is, not just people's opinions. Okay, we're going to go to the primary sources. So this is from Franz Grillparzer, who actually met Beethoven. Grillparzer's Schmutzlich Work, Samtslich Work, his work, 1874. He passed away in 72, so this was written before, but this was published in 74. But this is from his works. He's going to describe Beethoven himself, all right, from his personal view. All right, so on page 109 of this book, guys, again, this is in German. And this last paragraph, you guys see the name Beethoven right here. Beethoven, Hubert Beethoven. So I'm going to grab this whole paragraph right here. And you see down here, you got Schwartz, right? Schwartz, that's another way of saying Swarty. So we go to Google Translate. This is the whole paragraph. It detected German. As you guys can see in English, it says, the first time I met Beethoven was in my boyhood years. It may have been in 1804 or 1805 at a public evening entertainment in the house of my uncle, Joseph Sonnleitzner, then the comrade of an art and public association in Vienna. Besides Beethoven, Cherubini and Abi Vogler were also present. At that time, he was still thin, black, and contrary to his later habit, very elegantly dressed and wore glasses, which I remember so well, all right? He's describing him as black complexion, guys, so-called black. The original says Schwartz, black. Schwarty means black, dark complexion, all right? Okay, we got another source here. I just want to go ahead and show a couple sources and we go back to the reading, the history of this debate, right? So it says here from the book, The Life of Ludwig van Beethoven by Alexander Wheelock Dyer. Again, another person who met him. Okay, this is a famous translation, okay, by Henry Edward Kriebel, because this is originally in German, and I did find the German original. So it says here, this is volume 1, because we're going to check out both volumes, so volume 1 and 2. So this is volume 1. So on page 47, real quick, of this book, just want to go ahead and show you that not only Beethoven is described as dark complexion, but his grandfather as well. And I think we have a source for his dad as well. So it says that in 1769, Beethoven had already entered his 58th year. So that would be Beethoven, the grandfather. So the grandfather also had his name, Ludwig van Beethoven, the elder, because from the year they're saying, 1769, if you subtract 58, you get about 1711, 1712. That's when this guy was born. So again, he was a Flemish professional singer and music director. So it was already in the family, the music career, right? So again, Flemish professional singer and music director, best known as the grandfather of the composer Ludwig van Beethoven, all right? So in the baptismal register, he was named Ludovicus van Beethoven. During his life, his first name was written variously as Lodewijk, all right? So this is, the guy they're going to be talking about right here real quick. This is what I wanted to show you. So in regards to his grandfather, right, who's married to Josepha, that's his grandmother. Down here it says, when one recalls the imposing style of dress at the era, the short, muscular man with dark complexion and a very bright eyes, as Wegler describes him. Right, there's a primary source for that. The grandfather was a man short of stature, right? The grandfather, muscular with extremely animated eyes, okay? Dark complexion, right? So what they do, they whitewash his grandfather as well. We got to dodge the hijack. So even in the family, it's not because his mom is Moorish. Some people suggested, oh, no, it's a lot of people in his family are so-called black. A lot of these Europeans are so-called black guys. All right. Now let's get on to Beethoven's description in this book real quick. So on page 76, the footnote number 2, when they're trying to describe how he looked, right? It says the widow carved perfectly remembered a Johann van Beethoven as he's a tall, handsome man with powdered head. Ries and Simrock described Ludwig to Dr. Muller as a boy powerfully, almost clumsily built. So it says number 2. In the bottom, it says in the Fisher manuscript, short of stature, broad shoulders, short neck, large head, round nose, dark brown complexion. Again, dark brown complexion. He always bent forward slightly when he walked. In the house, he walked called the Spaniard or the Spaniard, right? So I think we're going to get other references of the same quote from the actual primary source from Fisher. They were calling him the Spaniards because Spaniards were so-called black at that time. They were always referencing black, dark complexion folks, Negroid people as maybe he's Spanish because the Spaniards were known to be so-called black. All right, so they're most likely talking about the boy, his son, right? Johann's son, which is Beethoven, right? The famous Beethoven. Dark brown complexion, it says here. Now in chapter 11 of this book, we're on page 146. It says here, it would be pleasant to announce the arrival of Ludwig van Beethoven in Vienna with, so to speak, a grand flourish of trumpets and to endorse the fancy in a highly colored and poetic account of his advent there. But unluckily, there is none of that lack of data which is favorable to that kind of composition, none of that obscurity which exalts one to write history as he would have it and not as it really was. The facts are too patent. Like the multitude of studious Jews and young men who came thither annually to find schools and teachers, this small, thin, look, dark complexion, they're talking about Beethoven, this small, thin, dark complexion, pockmarked, dark-eyed, bewigged young musician of 22 years had quietly journeyed to the capital to pursue the study of his art with a small, thin, dark complexion, pockmarked, black-eyed, and bewigged veteran composer. They're talking about, I think his name is Joseph Haydn, or John Haydn, which is another music composer from the time who was a veteran by the time Beethoven was 22, and he was also described as swarthy or dark complexion. They're not just talking about a tan, because listen to what they say here, guys. Pay attention now. All right, this is major drop right here. All right. So he's so-called black, traveling with another veteran black composer, right? In the well-known anecdote related by Carpani of Haydn's introduction to him, Antoine Esterhazy, the prince is made to call the composer a Moor. He called Haydn a Moor. He called Haydn, the guy they're saying dark complexion that Beethoven was with, the veteran, they call him a Moor. Prince Esterhazy called him that. Beethoven had even more of the Moor in his looks than his master. And now they're saying Beethoven even looked even more black or Negroid than Haydn. Beethoven looked even more like a Moor in his looks than his master. His front teeth, owing to the singular flatness of the roof of his mouth, protruded and, of course, thrust out his lips. The nose, too, was rather broad. All right, his nose is broad. Protruding lower lip. His lips protruded. He got a broad nose. He's like a Moor. He's dark complexion. We already got Schwartz, black. Decidedly flattened, broad nose, right? While the forehead was remarkably full and round. In the words of the late court secretary, Mahler, who twice painted his portrait, a bullet. A bullet, all right? They're calling them Moors. They're describing them like Moors. Beethoven and Haydn, another black European, Haydn. Joseph Haydn has also been whitewashed. You see, looking like George Washington. They all look the same. It's just a drawing, guys. Franz Joseph Haydn was an Austrian composer of the classical period. He was instrumental in the development of chamber music, such as the string quartet and piano trio. His contributions to musical form have led him to be called father of symphony and father of the string quartet. That was a black man, okay? So it's not just Beethoven, guys. There's all of them, these people at this time. All these people at this time. Down here it says Haydn was a friend and mentor of Mozart, a teacher of Beethoven, and the elder brother of composer Michael Haydn, okay? These are black Europeans, guys. They're describing these people as Moors. Again, Antoine Esterhazy, the prince, is made to call the composer a Moor. They're talking about Haydn, Joseph Haydn. And then they're saying Beethoven had even more of the Moor in his looks than his master, than the guy who taught him, as we just read. That was his teacher. Both of them were black. They've been whitewashed, guys. Let's continue. So real quick, we're at the website Ludwig van Toronto. Says feature was Beethoven Black by Anya Weisenberg. All right, he's been whitewashed. Says, as a theory, however, it turns out the idea has been bouncing around for more than a century. The question itself may not be the most interesting part. A look at the evidence reveals a great deal about the intersections of culture and race in the Western world. Samuel Coleridge Taylor was a mixed-race composer and conductor, well known in England in his day. In 1907, he wrote what is now cited as the first documentation of the theory that Beethoven was black. During the early to mid 20th century, black scholars were looking to reclaim their own history, including noted historian Dominique René de Lerma, a scholar on the subject of classical composers of color in the civil rights era of 1960s. Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael also claimed Beethoven as one of their own. Jamaican-American author and journalist Joel Augustus Rogers devoted much of his career to writing about the history of Africa and the African diaspora. That's the hijack. He's a Pan-African, we know. Yeah, he did a lot of good work talking about black Europeans and black Asians, but he made them all African. Rogers, J.A. Rogers. His writing often challenged accepted theories about the race, black folks' inferiority that were prevalent at the time. It says between 1941 and 1944, he published a 3-volume tome called Sex and Race. In it, he posited his conclusions that Beethoven was black. The evidence he cites are still the talking points of current social media debate. We're going to read that stuff, all right, today. Some of Beethoven's contemporaries noted the fact that his coloring was dark or swarthy. Prince Nicholas Esterhazy, the first of the infamous Habsburg royal family, is said to have called both Beethoven and Haydn, his court composer, Moors. That's what we just read, guys. We got the primary sources. Literally, he called them a Moor. To Europeans of the 18th century, a Moor might be someone who came from Northern Africa or simply a person with dark complexion, to add to the lack of clarity. There is genealogical evidence of Beethoven's heritage that goes back to the 14th century, and family places the family history as Flemish. Theories about an affair between Magdalena, Beethoven, and a Spaniard of Moorish descent, or other mixing of blood in the family persists. However, right, so again, we got his grandfather's also being described as dark, all right? It's not just from the mom. Now, here is the original source for Joseph Haydn's, what they're calling him a Moor, right? And you guys can see it's in the original language by Joseph Carpani. This is who they quoted. Carpani is saying the prince said that, right? So we go to page 120 of this book, and we're gonna grab, this whole part right here, guys, and we're gonna bring it over to Google Translate, right? And it's right here. As you guys can see, that's what I grabbed. And it says, Friedberg named Haydn, and at the same time brought him out of the hall where he had been hiding, trembling. Seeing him appear, the prince cried out, "What? This Moor? This Negro?" He said, "What? This Moor? This Negro?" Haydn's complexion was certainly not the whiteness of a lily. "Well, Moor, you will be in my service from now on. What is your name?" And Joseph Haydn said, "But you are already one of me," said the prince. "And why is it that I have never seen you here?" You guys see what it's saying? Moor, calling him a Moor, calling him so-called black. Haydn, Joseph Haydn, who got whitewashed. Joseph Haydn, who got whitewashed. All right? And that was the original source right here, as you guys can see. And the original language, that French? Yeah, French. It says Beethoven in America. Beethoven in America by Michael Broyles. In this book it says here, chapter 10, Beethoven was black. Why does it matter? So they're going to talk about a little bit about, Malcolm X. It says, as a young man on the streets in Roxbury, Mass., All right, Roxbury. I've been through there. I grew up in Boston, guys. I've been through there. I'm from Dorchester. I know a lot of people from Roxbury, you know, and JP and Hyde Park and all the other places. It says in Harlem, so Roxbury in Harlem, New York, Malcolm Little pursued a number of illegal activities, including gambling, drugs, and prostitution and burglary, right? So eventually he got thrown in prison, in Mass State Prison in 46, where he, when he changed, supposedly, he met the Muslim brothers and he started reading a lot. He joined the Nation of Islam. Following his release, he rejected his supposed slave name, which we already know Little, like, I mean, we don't know Little. I mean, we know a lot. I mean, Little is his last name, right? It's his real last name. And, that's not a slave name, right? These are all black folks who had these names. And, we got to dodge the hijack with all this bad misdirections back in the 60s and all these places. They're trying to make everybody into either African or coming from Arab nations or Islamic or, Arabia or wherever else, Morocco. All right. It says he broke with the Nation of Islam in 63 and adopted a more moderate tone regarding racial relations in the short remaining years of his life. But before he did, he gave a controversial interview that appeared in the May 1963 issue of Playboy. In it, he asserted that Western history, as written by Western historians, reflected a history whitening process, whitewashed history, in which black accomplishments were either left out or blacks who succeeded had gotten whitened. In the historical record. That's what we're showing today, guys. He cited a long list of Western historical figures who were black, including Jesus, that's the hijack, Columbus, Sarko. Columbus, we know he was a Portuguese Jew, Sephardic Jew, yeah. His real name was Fernandez Salvador Sarko. He was a black man, yeah. And Beethoven, yeah. Malcolm X had to drop. Malcolm X had to drop. 4 years later, on April 19, 1967, Stokely Carmichael addressed a predominantly black Garfield High School in Seattle, Washington. Carmichael had been founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and later became a leader in the more radical organization of the Black Panthers, okay? The principal point of his address was the same as Malcolm X in the interview, that virtually all important accomplishments of Western culture either came from, they're saying, black folks or were achieved by people of Negro descent, that white culture has stolen the black legacy and claimed it as its own. His rhetoric was purposely inflammatory, and his reference to Beethoven was specific and pointed. The problem is that our culture, this is what he said supposedly, is not legitimate. They have made us ashamed of it. Forget it. They have never had any culture. They have always stolen ours. That's a fact. The blues ain't theirs. Come on. Be serious. Ha! Be serious. Don't let them get away with that. The blues, we might let them get away with Bach. Beethoven was black. They won't tell you that in school. He was a Spanish Moor. Ha! Black as you. All right? Black as you guys. But they don't tell us that. It's calculated. It's calculated. That's what the dude was telling people back in 67. All right? Calls for black power, black pride, and black nationalism were heard frequently in the 1960s, right? That whole black movement, right? We touched the hijack, now we know genealogy, man. We ain't talking about crayon colors, right? And Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael were important voices in the world of black radicalism. Yet among the many historical figures whose African heritage was asserted, all right, touched the hijack, whose black heritage, Negroid ethnicity. Why was Beethoven so embraced by the Black Power movement? Why was a German composer who epitomized the Western European classical canon so important to their arguments? It's a good question, because, that's supposed to be a white thing, right? And that's not a white thing, guys. That kind of thinking it keeps us in a brainwashed state, like in a clueless state, right? It's not a white thing. Classical music and all that, that's not a white thing. Carmichael was willing to concede Bach, but Beethoven seems to have been an important symbol to the black community. How did this come about, and what did he signify? Both the historical evidence about Beethoven's ethnicity and the broader one of the validity of black assertions about Western culture have been discussed thoroughly in the literature. How claims about Beethoven arose in the nature of the Afrocentric argument, or, pro-black argument, must be considered, but the important question is why his ethnicity matters in connection with American society, and particularly in the 1960s and 70s among black nationalists and separatists such as Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael. In other words, how and why within 1960 American culture did it advantage certain groups to claim that Beethoven was black. All right. I mean, you guys, that's a pretty good question. I mean, but think about it. Again, that's a genius, right? That's a musical composer. They don't want you to think about black folks like that. You know, the notion that Beethoven had an African heritage was voiced as early as 1907 by the African British composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Coolidge Taylor based his theory on Beethoven's appearance, his friendships with the mulatto violinist George Polgren Bridgetower, another black composer, right? And according to his biographer Berwick Sayers, many little points of his character. Sayers never elaborated on what those traits were, but he did refer to a remarkable likeness in the outlines and general expression between Coleridge Taylor and Beethoven. Coleridge Taylor was of mixed race, with an African father and an English mother, right? Another guys, all these people also called black. Although Coleridge Taylor was English, he traveled in the United States and was familiar with African American writers such as W.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass. Regarding Beethoven's appearance, he commented, I think that if the greatest of all musicians were alive today, he would find it somewhat difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to obtain hotel accommodations in certain American cities, all right? He would be racially profiled, is what he's letting you know. Coleridge Taylor's remarks underscores his understanding that he himself could not get a hotel room in the Jim Crow era South. That he drew significance from Beethoven being a friend of Bridgetower seems less compelling than the statement about Beethoven's appearance. But the logic that because Beethoven befriended a black, he must have been black himself may not have been an unreasonable conclusion for a British subject of black descent who had witnessed the racism of the United States in the early 20th century. All right, and we continue with another source here. We're actually in volume 2 now. This is The Life of Ludwig van Beethoven by Alexander Wheelock Thayer. Again, person who met him. This is volume 2. All right, this is translated into English by Henry Edward Kriebel. Again, volume 2. We already read volume 1. Page 52 of this volume 2. We go into the footnote here regarding Beethoven. Right at the end, you guys can see the sentence here says Beethoven sat at the pianoforte and conducted the performance. A little dark, all right, dark, young looking man who wore spectacles, dark complexion. We move on to page 316 of this volume 2. Okay, they're talking about Beethoven. It says at that time and as Neat knew him, was charmingly good tempered to those whom he liked. But his dislikes were so strong that to avoid speaking to persons to whom he was not well affected, he would actually increase his pace in the street to a run. At this time, his dark complexion, all right, was very ruddy, dark complexion, very dark ruddy, guys, and extremely animated, dark ruddy. You know, guys, when I put dark brown cow or ruddy cow, this is what I get. Ruddy cow, ruddy. This is ruddy. Now imagine dark ruddy. You know, more like this. Dark ruddy. Dark ruddy, ruddy. Ruddy. Like ruddy. Ruddy. Look at that color, guys. Look at that color. Ruddy. Alright, ruddy. Dark ruddy. Dark ruddy, right? Dark complexion was very ruddy, copper colored, and extremely animated. His abundant hair was in an admirable disorder. He always had like this wild hair. He was always laughing when in good humor, which he, for the most part, was as Neat saw him. Okay? Dark complexion was very ruddy. Dark complexion was very ruddy. We're talking about Beethoven, right? Now, all these descriptions, be honest, guys. We just heard a lot of different descriptions, a couple sources. Does that look dark ruddy? This dark complexion, very ruddy? No. Does this a dark complexion? You see, that doesn't match what they're showing us, guys. That's a whitewashed history. Look, dark complexion. Does he look like a Moor? Does this look like a Moor to you? Any of these people look like Moors to you? Does that look like a Moor, African Moor to you? You see how they whitewashed everybody? This is what I'm trying to tell you. They whitewash people, guys. Any of these people look dark ruddy, dark complexion, swarthy, brown. Oh, we'll get the brown too. You'll see. You see, none of these. Look, Does this look like a Moor? Oh, look, they got the dreadlocks going here, though. Yeah. All right, we move on to another source here. And it says here, An Unrequited Love, an episode in the life of Beethoven from the Diary of a Young Lady. So this is from a primary account by Ludwig Noll, translated by Annie Wood. All right. From 1876. So this is even older than this because this is a translation from another person, right? This is done in 1876. Even this translation is old. All right. We're going to go to a specific page. On page 59, we're going to read from March 12th entry. It says here, for a long time yesterday evening, I hoped in vain that Beethoven would come. Mama and I were the only two at home. Only a few of our usual visitors came. At last, just as I had settled down into the usual evening's work, someone rang, and behold, it was our dear friend at last. He has no idea, I think, how fond we all are of him. I in particular. He never struck me as an ugly man, but lately his face pleases me. His manners too are so original, and all he says has weight. All right, and then the author says Beethoven could not possibly be called a handsome man. His somewhat flat, broad nose, and rather wide mouth, his small piercing eyes, and swarthy complexion, so-called black, swarthy complexion, pockmarked into the bargain, gave him a strong resemblance to a mulatto. He looks like a mulatto, and caused many young ladies to pronounce him ugly. But an artist who took his portrait that year describes him thus: Beethoven has an earnest, grave expression, and usually his quick, piercing eyes glance upwards with a gloomy look. His lips are closed, but the mouth is not unpleasant in expression. Okay, and it goes on. So, swarthy, with a flat, broad nose and a wide mouth. Swarthy complexion, so-called black. So swarthy. Hashtag so swarthy, guys. All right, moving on. We're going to get a translation of this German book right here. Des Bonner Backermeister Gottfried Fischer. All right, Fischer's account. We already got a little quote of Fischer describing him as dark brown, but this is the actual translated, this is the German original, right? We're going to get a English translated right here from the Beethoven Journal, volume 35. The Bondmaster Baker, Gottfried Fischer, Reminiscence of Beethoven's Youth. That's the translation. Translated into English with editorial commentary and notes. So about page 52 of this article, this translation in English, it says here, the stature at the time of Herr Ludwig van Beethoven. So this is what this guy is saying, right? From this book. All right, another source that met him, Fischer. All right, we got different people that are talking about him, guys. So this is what he says. He says, of short, stocky build, broad-shouldered, with a short neck, large head, round nose, dark brown facial complexion, dark brown. He always had a somewhat forward-bending gait. Right, we got this quote. In the house in his boyhood, he used to be called the Spaniard. His barber was Herr Triput and subsequently Herr Hensler. He was called the Spaniard because he was black. So-called black, dark brown, right? Again, does this look like a dark brown person to you? Does this look like a dark brown person to you? You got to break the spell, guys. I can't say it enough. Does this look like a dark brown person to you? A Moor, right? This is what I'm saying, guys. Dark brown, huh? None of the descriptions fit the drawings they show us or the pictures they show us. Dark brown, huh? This is supposed to be dark brown. You guys see? That's the hijack. Dark brown facial complexion. We move on, right? PopularBeethoven.com. So this might be a whitewashed image too. So we're gonna get a reading or a writing from Carl Cerny. Who's Carl Cerny? That's one of his students. So this article will introduce one of Beethoven's talented piano students, Carl Cerny. Cerny became a teacher himself at the age of 15, played in the premieres of Beethoven's concertos. So this is one of Beethoven's students, right? Who was called Cerny, Czech origin, whatever. He was one of his students, right? Cerny meets Beethoven, just so you guys can know the background. So Carl Cerny actually wrote a memoir, a book, which I had a very hard time finding, but I did find Scribd has it right here, like a transcript of it, you know, and it says Recollections of My Life. That's what it's called. by Carl Cerny, the student, right? Full description, it says, this summary provides an overview of the first section of Carl Cerny's autobiographical manuscript, Recollections from My Life. Cerny describes growing up in Vienna surrounded by music, and his father was a music teacher who taught piano and received other musicians. He showed early musical talent, learning to play pieces by age. 3. A key influence was his father's friend Krumpholz, a violinist who was obsessed with the Beethoven's music and would share stories of Beethoven's compositions with John Cerny. This sparked Cerny's admiration for Beethoven's work at an early age. So then eventually he became a student. So again, this is something he wrote. We got another primary source, guys. This is what I wanted you to understand. We're getting different accounts from different people that actually met Beethoven. They're all describing him as a dark complexion person, a swarthy person, okay? So first we go to page 304 of his book, right? Where he is talking about what Beethoven looks like, right? So I say, what's his name? Asked my father with some astonishment. He is small, ugly, swarthy young fellow and seems to have a willful disposition, answered Gilix. Prince Lyshkovsky brought him to Vienna from Germany to let him study composition with Haydn, Albrechtsberger, and Salieri, and his name is Beethoven. He's what? Swarthy. Swarthy. He's swarthy. Okay, swarthy. His dad telling him, hey, he's a swarthy guy, the black guy, you know. And remember, he studied with Haydn, another black person. Black composition. Swarthy, right? Go to another page now. Swarthy. Page 306. It says Beethoven himself was wearing a jacket and trousers made of some dark gray material of furry texture, and he immediately reminded me of the picture of Campy's Robinson Crusoe, which I happened to be reading at the time. His jet black hair cut a la Titus made him look shaggy. Shaggy hair, huh? The way it stood off from his head. Shaggy hair. Since his beard had not been shaved for several days, the lower part of his swarthy face looked even darker. Even darker. His swarthy face even darker. All right, Beethoven, swarthy face looked even darker. Okay? I also noticed immediately with the power of obsession, so typical of children, that both his ears were stuffed with cotton, which seemed to have been dipped in a yellow liquid. But at that time, he certainly appeared to be not the least bit hard of hearing. Okay? His swarthy looked even dark. Swarthy, his black face. Beethoven, again, being described by one of his students, guys, as a black man. All right, so real quick, go to another source real quick. It says here, Beethoven by Romain Rolland, translated by B. Constance Hu, with a brief analysis of the sonatas, the symphonies, and the quartets by A. Eaglefield Hull. All right, this is from 1919. Again, this is a translation from an older thing. Look how they got Beethoven here. You see? Does that look like a dark brown, swarthy Moor? Come on now, guys. Come on now. You see? Dark colored, dark, very ruddy, dark complexion. Come on now. All right, so literally, guys, right in the first page, it says Beethoven, his life. It says he was short and thick-set, broad-shouldered and athletic build, a big face, ruddy in complexion, not white, not fair. Ruddy can mean copper-colored, dark red. Ruddy in complexion, as I said, very dark complexion, very ruddy, swarthy, brownish, right? We're going to see brown. You guys are going to see. We're not done yet. Except towards the end of his life when his color became sickly and yellow. So he got lighter as he grew up, right? He was dark as a kid, all right? So in this source, they're saying ruddy, all right? Don't get confused, all right? We're talking about ruddy cows. Don't get confused. Ruddy cows, all right? When we're talking about ruddy cows, this is what you get, ruddy. So we barely fell up to this part of the book now. It says here, particularly in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, there was no doubt in many segments of the black community that Beethoven, at the very least, had some black blood. Patricia Williams, writing in 1991, claimed that blacks have been teaching white people that Beethoven was black for over 100 years now, okay? So a lot of black folks knew this, guys, growing up, and they were teaching their own people, right? Listen to what they're telling you, this lady. Black musicians grew up in the 60s and 70s, remember hearing about it, as did many others in the black community. Several events in the late 1960s did much to spread this belief beyond black culture. However, all right, look at this drawing right here. It says Beethoven was black and proud. Beethoven was black and proud. You see this? Wow, look at that, guys. Rolling Stone drawing of Beethoven made to look black. A Rolling Stone drawing. The Rolling Stone magazine? What? Says sometime in 1968 or 1969, Doug Cass, a disc jockey at KDIA, the top-rated soul station in San Francisco, began to recite, Beethoven was black. All right? He kept saying it. Beethoven was black. Constantly between recordings, almost as a mantra. In reaction, mail poured in from all over the country, from clergy, from supportive blacks, from outraged whites, and from scholars. Spurred by the maelstrom he had stirred, Cass formed Beethoven Was Black Inc., with the intention of marketing educational materials, bumper stickers, and sweatshirts. Talk shows in both San Francisco and Los Angeles debated the question. Soul publications featured a story on this phenomenon in a fan magazine. The international issue of Life magazine ran a story in its May 1969 issue. The Rolling Stone issue of July 14, 1969 contained a story titled Beethoven Was Black and Proud. All right, Rolling Stone magazine even did a story on it with a line drawing of Beethoven that made him look African American. Wow, I didn't know none of this history, guys. This publicity caught the attention of Charles M. Schulz, who incorporated it into his Peanuts comic strip on July 7th, 1969. Huh? Is that why he really put it in there? While almost everyone who weighed in on the issue cited Rogers as their principal source, if they cited a source at all, most went from Rogers' qualified conclusion to a definite assertion, as Carmichael did. Malcolm X was even more specific. Well, Hannibal, the most successful general that ever lived, was a black man too. All right, Hannibal too. We'll get to that. So was Beethoven. Beethoven's father was one of the blackamoors that hired themselves out in Europe as a professional soldier. You guys hear that? So Malcolm X had even more drop. His dad was a indentured servant. He was known as a black indentured servant. He hired himself as a soldier. Others, when confronted with evidence about Beethoven's paternal ancestry, have stated that his mother was a Moor or from the Caribbean. Oh, from the Caribbean, huh? Now, see, closer to home, huh? Although the issue of a possible black heritage for Beethoven crested in the 1960s and 1970s, it did not disappear. In 1991, Molefi Asante referred to that Negro composer Beethoven. In 1990, Detroit Piston power forward John Sally was asked to recite Casey at the Bat with the Detroit Symphony. When asked about appearing with a symphony, he laughed. Hey, Beethoven was black. The absence of records about Beethoven's maternal ancestry was used as proof of his African ancestry. That's the hijack. The argument running that these records disappeared because the Nazis did not want the truth known. And in the early 21st century, the web is filled with claims, often providing striking, fictitious details, such as the following. People whom specialize in Beethoven all agree that he was black. Actually, that's the truth we're getting so far. Everybody that knew him or studies him, right? They're not saying he's black, but they're describing him, showing you that he was described as dark complexion, a colored person. Women whom have had sex with him say that he was of blackish brown complexion. That's a funny one. The most reputable Beethoven historian said that he was black. All right. If Alexander W. Thayer, we read his descriptions already, definitely calling him dark complexion, dark red, dark brown. Perhaps the foremost authority on Beethoven isn't anybody special. Then please tell us which historian who specializes in Beethoven is somebody special. In another case, this particular syllogism appeared on the web. Beethoven was indeed black. We can derive this through the simple formula. Only oppressed people make great music. This is bad reasons why. These are bad reasons. They're making kind of fun of it. Like, these are bad reasons. People don't take it serious. But we're showing primary sources, guys, apart from all what we're reading right now, right? We're just reading the history of the debate right now. One reads the above syllogism and asks if this serious or ironic. While Wilson Moses and Marcus Garvey, both prominent black intellectuals, believe there is considerable irony, even sarcasm within the black community over the issues of Beethoven and of racial identification, the overall tone of the many claims suggests that indeed most writers and bloggers are serious. In many such arguments, any trace of Rogers' nuance is gone. What was possibility has become a certainty. Beethoven was black. black. Okay, now look at this. Peanuts. It says here that some scholars feel that Beethoven was black. Really? And look. It says, do you mean to tell me that all these years I've been playing soul music? Oh yeah, that's what exactly it means, man. The question of Beethoven's racial mix came to a head at Stanford University in 1988 in what has been called the Ujamaa House incident. It merits a close look for several reasons. It received national publicity. Beethoven's ethnicity was at the heart of the situation. It raised fundamental questions about racial perceptions and their impact on different ethnic and social groups, and it had aesthetic ramifications in relation to Beethoven's music. Continue a little further ahead, just to get the point across. It says, within this separatist environment, it is hard to see where Beethoven would fit, which returns to the earlier question. Why did it advantage Afrocentric blacks to claim Beethoven? Afrocentric, the Pan-Africans especially, right? The most obvious answer might be that to claim Beethoven was black was to claim metaphorically the entire Western musical heritage, which would be consistent with Pan-African assertions, which, if they gave him the title of the father of Western music, then, that would definitely be and that's definitely a very big reason why they will hide that, right? Throughout the 19th century, Beethoven was so venerated and influential that many composers considered him a force that they had to fight against to keep from being enveloped. When writing his first symphony, for example, Johannes Brahms had commented, "You have no idea how difficult it is to write a symphony when you hear the footsteps of a giant like Beethoven striding behind you." After it was finished, the conductor Hans von Bülow allegedly referred to Brahms' symphony as Beethoven's 10th. In the 20th century, a popular biography by Robert Haven Schaffler was titled Beethoven, the Man Who Freed Music. If Beethoven had been black, then all of the Western music for the past 2 centuries derived from black culture, so-called black. That's what I'm saying. All skin folks ain't skin folks, guys. It's not about just black history or black culture. It's just he was black, and most people were black in general in the past. There has been an ethnic cleansing. There has been more pale skin people eventually coming out, and there has been a whitewashing of history, guys. That is a very big reason why they will hide this, right? And also because once you start digging into his ancestry, you'll find no African. That's going to debunk the out of Africa theory. When you start seeing all these black Europeans who don't go back to Africa, that's the other big reason. All right, guys, I'm at this source now. All right, we're going to take a look at some more primary sources describing him. It says here, Beethoven, impressions by his contemporaries, okay? What the people that knew him said about him, all right? On page 8 of this book, they're talking about his appearance, how they dressed and everything, the gala dress for court musicians in green, and then it says, former physique of Herr Ludwig van Beethoven, short and thick-set, broad across the shoulders, short neck, large head, rounded nose, dark brown complexion. Dark brown complexion. Again, is this dark brown right here? Is this dark brown, guys? Come on, be honest. That's not dark brown, guys. That's not dark brown. Dark brown. Nope, that's not dark brown. Complexion. And again, we get the reference when he did not shave for days. It made the lower part of his already brown face. They're saying swarty in the other one. They're saying brown here. So you guys don't get it confused. It's not a tan. Literally, he's brown. Aren't you brown? Makes still darker. It made his brown face still darker because he grew his beard. We're talking about Beethoven himself wore morning coat, right? We got these references. We're just getting different descriptions by different people telling you that these people said that, the people who actually met him. And this here right here is Bettina von Orning to Antoine Bieler. She wrote this in 1810. All right, I did not make Beethoven's acquaintance until the last days of my stay here, right? So let's get to the part. She says that at last he came in person. He was small, for all his soul and heart were so big. Brown, he's brown and full of pockmarks. Brown complexion, he is what one terms repulsive, yet has a divine brow, rounded with such noble harmony that one is tempted to look on it as a magnificent work of art. He had black hair, very long, which he tosses back, and does not know his own age, but thinks he is 53. That's how she describing him, man. Brown complexion. On page 180 of the same book, It describes him here. So jet why should Beethoven's features look like his scores? His complexion was brownish, okay? Brownish. We're not just talking about a guy, a white man with a tan, a little dark. No, he was swarthy, he was black, he was dark complexion, dark brown, ruddy, brownish, brown, all right? We're getting all the descriptions. He's called a Moor, right? Brownish, yet not strong. Healthy tan, which the huntsman acquires, but rather one transposed into a sickly yellowish tone. His nose was narrow and sharp, his mouth benevolent, his eyes small, light gray, yet eloquent. All right? We got this reference earlier as well, where there's describing Beethoven. Says, why? Said my father astonished. What is the man's name? He is a young man, small, homely, dark, and obstinate looking, replied Janelik. Okay, talking about Beethoven. He is called Beethoven. Dark, right? Got that earlier. Dark complexion. Page 161 of the same book, we get him described here. It says the mouth. So let's start right here. It says his hair was thick, gray, bristly. Thick hair and bristly. Here and there altogether white. His forehead and skull had an exceptionally broad curve and were high, like a temple. His nose was foursquare, like that of a lion. Like a lion's nose, flat and broad, right? Like black folks. The mouth nobly shaped and soft, the chin broad, with those wonderful shell-formed grooves in all his portraits, and formed by two jawbones, which seemed meant to crack the hardest nuts. It says a dark red, copper colored, a dark red, that's what they mean by ruddy, a dark red overspread his broad, pockmarked face. Okay, dark red. That's his complexion, dark red. Dark red spread his broad, pockmarked face beneath the bushy, gloomily contracted eyebrows. Bushy eyebrows. Small radiant eyes beamed mildly upon those entering his cyclopean, four-cornered figure, which towered but slightly above that of Weber, was covered by a shabby house robe with torn sleeves. Okay? All right, again, a dark red face. Dark red, dark brown, swarthy, black, brown, a Moor, like all these descriptions they're getting of him, right? Primary accounts, different people. Then none of them had said anything of him being fair or pale or anything like that, trying to depict a so-called white man. Every description you would think of, minimum, a mulatto, minimum. People, what you think of a mulatto, right? A mixed person, but he was definitely a Negro man, a person that would be called African American today if he lived in the States. He'd be called black American. Dark red, huh? Dark, aren't you dark red? Aren't you dark red, dark brown, brownish? Just like him? Yeah. All right, you guys see? I got another source here, right? This is by Anton Felix Schindler. Says here, Beethoven as I knew him. Beethoven as I knew him. That's the hijack. That don't look like a dark red, dark brown, swarthy, Moor. That doesn't look like it at all. Translated by Constant L. Joyce. So these are all older writings that have been translated. All right. On page 454 of this book, guys, 454, it says here, we are indebted to Friedrich Rochlitz for this faithful description, which he wrote to his friend Hartel in Leipzig after repeated visits to Beethoven in the summer of 1822 at Baden near Vienna, and which he later incorporated into his book Vorfreude der Torkunst, all right, volume 4. Let us hear what he says. Now, this is, again, another primary source, another person, a different person than what we already read, all right? It says, if I had not been prepared for it, the sight of him would have disturbed me, as it has so many others. It was not the almost savage exterior, savage, not the thick black hair that hung shaggily. You see that? Shaggily, thick black hair, shaggy, thick black hair around his face, nor any other single feature, but the whole impression of his presence. Picture to yourself a man of about 50 years, somewhat shorter than the average, yet of powerful, stocky build. His bone structure is compact and very strong, something like Fichte's, but heavier, especially in the full face. His complexion is ruddy, All right, as we just said, dark red, huh? Dark red. We just got the other one, dark red and healthy. His eyes are restless, growing, and when his gaze is fixed, almost piercing, if they move at all. The movement is there and abrupt, okay, and it keeps going. That's how he's being described at 52. Remember, he was darker when he was younger, but he's dark red, still ruddy brown, brownish. All right, as you guys can see, shaggy, thick hair with shaggy, thick hair with shaggy, thick hair, huh? All right, guys, and now, for the dismount, we're gonna read one of the guys who made this whole reality, this history, popular in more modern times, which is J.H. Rogers or Joel Augustus Rogers, right? Very Pan African guy, but we respect his work in the past because he did bring the awareness to everyone in the world that there was black folks all over the world. The only thing is he still went with the whole Pan African thing that he made them all Africans, and we know better now. But again, let's just get the babies out and dodge the hijacks, right? Be ready to dodge the hijacks. It's going to say a lot about African this and African that, all right? But it says here, Sex and Race, Volume 3, Why White and Black Mix in Spite of Opposition, by J.A. Rogers, all right? By J.A. Rogers. This is from, I think, 1944, right? 1944. Now we go to page 306 of this book. It says here, Notes on Beethoven. Because Beethoven was German, because his portraits are usually shown with a white tone and abundant hair, nearly everyone thinks of him as a white man, right? That's what you've been brainwashed. That's what whitewashing images do to you. Psychological. Beethoven's lovers are certain of this and are generally amazed and even indignant when told that he was Negroid in color and features. However, there is not a single shred of evidence to support the belief that he was a white man. That's what I was just saying. There was nothing there saying he's pale. Ruddy don't mean pale skin, guys. You still think ruddy means pale skin, and you're way off. Especially when they're being described also the same person as black, swarthy, dark brown, brown, brownish, dark red. Okay. However, there is not a single shred that he was a white man, neither from those who knew him nor from his biographers. All right. Beethoven's color according to his contemporaries. So Fisher, rounded nose, black, brownish complexion. All right, we got that. Carl Cerny. His beard had not been shaved for several days, made the lower part of him already brown face still darker. Right, we got these already. Jules Parker called him dark. Right? Bettina von Arnim, brown. We got that. Weber, dark red. We just got that, right? Hair bristly. Schindler, red and brown. We didn't get that one. So here's another one. We missed red and brown. Rellstab, brownish. Jelinek, short, ugly, and dark. Okay, come on. We got all these sources. We just read them all. So you don't have to believe J.R. Rogers. We did the research ourselves, okay? The only one of Beethoven's contemporaries who described him as being of a color that might be interpreted as white was Sir Julius Benedict, who said he was very red. Very red man, copper cut. Benedict, however, wrote his impressions more than 20 years after he had seen Beethoven once. Beethoven's face had a ruddy tint, which was accentuated by his walks in the open air. I have seen mulattoes with this ruddy complexion, which in winter could be called very red. Beethoven's color, according to his biographers. Fanny Giannatasio del Rio. Beethoven could not possibly be called a handsome man. His somewhat flat, broad nose and rather wide mouth, his small, piercing eyes, and swarthy complexion, park nothing to the bargain, gave him a strong resemblance to a mulatto. All right, we got that source. She was in love with him, you know. It says May Byron also said swarthy, right? And it says A Day with Beethoven, page 9, 1927. We didn't even get that one. This is another source. Look at another source here, right? The word swarthy comes from the Anglo-Saxon swart, black. I mean, we've broken this down, right? This word in various forms has the same meaning in several North European languages, as in the German, shorts. Alexander Wheelock Dyer, in his description of Beethoven, cites the following story from Andrew Hevesy, another of Beethoven's biographers, who had it from Carpani. The story is about Haydn's, Beethoven's teacher. Everyone knows the incident at Kismarton, or Eisenstadt, the residence of Prince Esterhazy, on his birthday. In the middle of the first allegro of Haydn's symphony, His Highness asked the name of the author. He was brought forward. "What?" exclaimed the prince. "The music is by this Blackamoor?" We got that earlier, right? "Well, my fine Blackamoor, henceforth thou art in my service. What is thy name?" "Joseph Haydn." All right, we got the source. Carpani says of this that Haydn's color gave strong reason for the prince's remark that Haydn was therefore thereafter called the Moor. As late as the last century, the word Moor was used to describe Negroes in all the countries of Western Europe. Shakespeare uses the word Moor and Negro synonymously. All right. In Germany, the Negro was called Moor. In France, Maure or Moor. In Sweden, Maurien. Okay, this is all true, guys. Thayer, by way of illustrating how dark and Negro Beethoven was, used the above-mentioned incident concerning Haydn and asked that Beethoven had even more of the Moor in his features than his master. All right, that is Haydn. He asked that Beethoven's nose too was rather broad and definitely flattened. Okay. Thayer adds a true and exhaustive picture of Beethoven as a man would present an almost ludicrous contrast to that which is generally entertained as correct. Even a person from his time who saw him said that he is being whitewashed even when he was alive. All right. It wouldn't match. It wouldn't match. It would contrast what they try to say is him. As sculptors and painters have each in turn idealized the work of his predecessor until the composer stands before us like a Homeric god, until those who knew him personally, could they return to the earth, would never suspect that the grand form and more noble portraits are intended to represent the short, muscular figure and picket face of their old friend. Right? They wouldn't recognize him. People who met him and saw the images of Beethoven today would not know that's Beethoven being depicted, guys, because he's been whitewashed. Frederick Hearst says Beethoven was short and corpulent. He had coal black hair, dark eyes, and skin. Dark eyes and skin. That's another source we didn't get, right? Dark eyes and skin. But he's been right so far. We can verify all this. You guys got to verify that his face was quite ugly with strong protruding jaws, prognathy, receding forehead, and flat, thick nose. One may easily trace in Beethoven's slightly Negroid traits. All right, these are all sources we didn't get. That's why we're going over this. Mankan and Beethoven physiognomy. All right. That's the source, page 164. The translation in Race and Civilization, page 123, 1928. On page 170, Hertz also says Beethoven with his Negroid traits. Okay? All right? Bruno Springer and his racial mixture as a basic principle of life, as reported in the New York Times, July 1st, 1940, in an article entitled Negroid Blood in Hitler's Aryans, mentions Beethoven. All right? Negroid blood in Hitler's Aryans. Hitler was Negroid. We already got the drop. But he also mentions Beethoven as one of the great Germans who was of Negro ancestry. This book, according to the Times, was published in Berlin. Okay, come on now. A highly regarded book. Emil Ludwig says his Beethoven's face reveals no trace of the German. He was so dark that people dubbed him Spaniard, a Spaniard. Certainly that there was a mixture of Spanish blood in his half Netherlander, as in so many others. All right, come on now. All these sources we didn't get, guys, on top of the ones we already showed. Other writers here and there have also, like myself, been struck by Beethoven's Negroid appearance. J.W. Chadwick says that Frederick Douglass, great mulatto abolitionist, bore a certain resemblance to Beethoven. All right, he looked like Frederick Douglass, just like, what's his name? Karl Marx looked like Frederick Douglass. A Life for Liberty, page 197. So this is Beethoven at the age of 42, the mess they did, supposedly. All right. Said W.B. Du Bois, writing of George Bridgetower, Beethoven's mulatto companion and accompanist, says, and the unexplained complexion of Beethoven's own father, the Negro. W.C.B. Sayers says of Coleridge, so look, a complexion of Beethoven's own father, right? And his grandfather, remember. So W.C.B. Sayers says of Coleridge Taylor, noted English mulatto composer, the story is told of a playful prank of Mr. Henry Downes, who decorated the large bust of Beethoven in the conservatoire with Coleridge Taylor's sombrero. It was a small hat for a large head, but it helped to show the remarkable resemblance that existed between the sovereign composer and the colored one. This likeness's brow in the outlines and general expression of the face has been remarked in later photographs of Coleridge Taylor. In short, there is no evidence whatever to show that Beethoven was white. Okay, Beethoven's grandfather came from Leuven, Belgium, which with Holland had been ruled for centuries by Spain. The Spaniards of that time not only had considerable Negro strain from the Moorish invasion, but they had unmixed Negroes in their armies. For further details of this, see Sex and Race Volume 1. All right, he breaks all that down, which we're going to get eventually, guys. We've already gotten all this, though. This is what I'm saying. We've already gone over the people in these areas and how Sephardi Jews and Moors and the black royalty nobility before them were there. All right, it says, as regards Goethe, the great German writer who is also said to be of Negro descriptions, all right, even him is a, so it says, said to be of Negro descriptions of him is a sketch from life by Letroni and engraved by Hoffel. Done in charcoal, they showed Beethoven dark, that is more like the descriptions of his color. However, in some books, this picture has been changed somewhat. The charcoal has been rubbed out, giving quite a different aspect to his face. One of the latter appears in Emil Ludwig's Beethoven's Compare This, for instance. All right, so they had whitewashed even an image that was showing him black. Finally, the Negro strain in Beethoven comes out clearly in his life mask at the age of 42, and even more in his death mask. As regards Goethe, great German writer who is also said to be of Negro ancestry, see Sex and Race Volume 1, for source of Goethe's ancestry, Hertz says it is indeed very significant that many race dogmatists find in Goethe non-Teutonic Oriental traits. Almost all anthropologists hold Goethe for a non-Teuton. He had a distinctly dark complexion. All right, so that's a future video we're gonna get. All right, future video we're gonna get. All right, so that's about it, guys. You guys see, we went over all those sources and more. All right, Beethoven's color. All right. So I had a conversation with AI about all this, and they kind of blocked me because I said, "Hey, man, you're programmed to just say, whatever things," until they blocked me. you know. But then he still answered me. He still answered me. He says, "I really appreciate the clarity and intent behind your message." This is the message they flagged, right? And you're absolutely right to challenge historical narratives that have often been distorted by colonial, racial, or Eurocentric frameworks. You're touching on critical historical truths, on raising historical representation. Race is a social construct, not a biological fact. The concept of dividing people by race is relatively recent, okay, guys? And rooted in colonial systems of power, not scientific reality. Swartiness, dark complexions, and textured hair were not uncommon in early European populations, especially in Southern Europe. This is ChatGPT, right? The Mediterranean, and among various groups that don't fit modern racial categories. Many prominent historical figures, Beethoven included, have had their appearance standardized or whitewashed. Beethoven has been whitewashed. This is ChatGPT because I made him snitch. I made him. I say, hey, you're not giving me everything. To fit later ideals of whiteness, especially during the 19th and 20th centuries when Europe was redefining its identity around whiteness, right? This is our conclusion here, guys, today. Okay, he's been whitewashed. Race is a very new concept. They were trying to fit their European standards of whiteness. On Beethoven specifically, says there are multiple primary descriptions that describe Beethoven as having a dark brownish or swarthy complexion. Numerous, multiple primary sources. Blackish, brown hair and short neck with broad, powerful frame, somewhat rough, unkempt, and wild appearance. Despite this, portraits of him tend to show a pale-skinned, romanticized version, which does not align with those first-hand accounts, okay? All right, this is what I'm trying to tell you. These images do not fit the primary source descriptions of this person. He's been whitewashed, guys. He's been whitewashed. They're making fun of us. They're fooling us. Look at that. He's been whitewashed. This is how they're laughing in our faces. He's been whitewashed, just like ChatGPT is telling us. He's been romanticized, which does not align with those first-hand accounts. Okay? And that's where we're going to leave it off today, guys. Race is a modern concept. He's been whitewashed, Beethoven included. They have been whitewashed. Right? I hope you guys know now for sure, and you have all the sources and where to go get them. You have to see that he was a so-called black man or colored person. That doesn't mean he was African. We know first Europeans were black. We know many early Europeans were so-called black. But all kinfolk ain't kinfolk, guys. And Negroes are not just coming out of Africa. You gotta break out of that spell, that Darwinism, that out of Africa theories. Those are from monkey bones. That's based off Darwinism. Literally admitting that you come out of apes if you believe in out of Africa theories, because that's what Darwinism has made it. That's what out of Africa is coming from, Darwinism, guys. And these bones that they trace the people back to are ape monkey bones. They're not modern human. We have videos on that as well. All right. So I hope you guys understand. And when I'm showing you all these prominent Europeans, or just in general these black Europeans, you understand that there has been a whitewashing. History is full of lies, and we have to do the work and the research, and we have to be logical sometimes and get rid of our concepts sometimes, our preconceived concepts that have been indoctrinated into us, our stereotypes, our prejudices, these theories about race. This has been rooted into us. It's not scientific reality, as it says here. These are colonial systems of power that we're still carrying around. We got to break out of that. I'm trying to help you. I'm not trying to blackwash. I'm trying to correct history. I'm trying to show you how important the role of black folks are in the world. But again, all black folks are not the same. That doesn't mean he's related to you. He could be to some of you, a lot of you. But you got to do your genealogy to see that. All right. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video and all the sources I showed, and I hope it's clear. I hope this is undeniable proof. You know, the most thing you can logically come up with is that he was a person of color. After reading all the sources, after seeing all the research. If not, you'd just be practicing cognitive dissonance, and you'd be trolling and hurt. All right. That's all I got to say, guys. And we did it again. We got another black European, Beethoven, the father of Western music, right? Yeah, he was a black man. Beethoven was black. Appreciate you guys sticking around all the way to the end of today's presentation. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to like and share so everybody can know the truth. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed to my channel. You just here and there sometimes trying to see what I'm saying or showing. Come on, man, help me out. Subscribe. If you like to support what I do, you can support me on my Patreon page. I got the links of my channel membership and my Patreon page in the description of all my videos if you want to support those two ways, what I do, so I can continue doing this and bringing this truth to the rest of the world, guys. We got to break out of this. We got to know the truth. We got to know ourselves truly. If we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. All right? Thank you very much for being here today, guys. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawaii.